No, we're both on.
Hey.
Good morning, Eric Tokos. I'm City of Newport's Community Development Director. I've been with the City of Newport since about 2009. I've been working in planning and building related field for close to 30 years now in the states of Colorado, Idaho, and Oregon. I have a PowerPoint presentation I'll be going through to kind of cover the topics that are on the agenda. It's a number of slides. I'll be moving through a number of them pretty quickly. And we'll try to reserve some time at the end for questions. Okay. So first off, I'd like to cover development trends. Much of what I'm going to be talking about relates to housing, although I will, at times, I can touch on some of the commercial, industrial, and institutional development that we've seen in recent years and expect to see in coming years. In terms of our historic population trends, this just gives you a trend line for Newport. We have been at or near 10,000 in year-round population for a number of years. Current population estimates just 10,000, a little over 10,500. This, seasonally, our summer population bumps up to over 25,000. Just in terms of construction activity, this year actually has been reasonably good. As you can see, we're on pace to match, if not exceed, last year's totals. Building permitting has been relatively steady even through the pandemic. In terms of housing permitted, we had gone for a very long period of time with next to no multifamily development, but in the last 5 years, as you can see, we've permitted quite a bit. Now, some of that 110 units you see in 2019 is subsidized housing, or what we call affordable housing, or 60% median area income. I'll talk a little bit about that project in a few minutes, but the balance of those units are market rate rentals in different parts of the city. Our population trend line in Newport, we're getting older. That's what this particular chart shows, and we expect that trend to continue moving forward. We're also getting more diverse, particularly as it relates to the Latinx community. We now are effectively at about 20% of our population, and we need to think about that certainly from the city's perspective as we do outreach and engagement with the community on issues such as housing. In terms of household size, Newport, our households are smaller than Oregon's households in general. And this is probably related to the fact that we have a little bit older population. Our housing mix has a little bit less in the way of single family detached as compared to the state overall and Lincoln County overall. There's a little bit more in the way of what we call middle housing, the duplex, triplex, quadplex, and multifamily is a little bit higher, certainly than Lincoln County in general. Our owner versus renter occupied kind of mix has kind of vacillated in the low 50s over the years. Certainly those in terms of owner occupied units tend to be single family detached, with your rentals being more of a mix of housing from single family detached to multifamily to that kind of middle housing, duplex, triplex, fourplex. should come as no surprise, median home sales prices have climbed, and they're very high at this point in time. Newport in Lincoln City, Astoria, gives you a sense of kind of what the coastal condition is. Our monthly asking rental prices have also been climbing. This chart gives you a pretty good sense. So we're now looking at about $1,300 a month. Typical rental price per unit. What this leads to is we have a pretty significant part of our population that's what we would call cost burden. That is, they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs, or they're severely cost burdened and they're spending more than half of their income on housing costs. Another thing is, it should come really as no surprise in our area. Newport is a regional employment center, and it has relatively high housing costs and limited housing supply, which means that bulk of the people that work in Newport are commuting in from other areas such as Toledo, Siletz, Lincoln City, Seal Rock, Walport, or further out such as Philomath and Corvallis. Now we have a couple of different sets of population forecasts. The one that we are legally obligated to take a look at is the one that Portland State University puts out. It's not a particularly good forecast, and we don't really rely on it for planning purposes. We use this alternative growth forecast, which is a little bit more consistent with our historic kind of growth pattern over the years. So our expectation is that we'll need a little over 600 additional dwelling units over the next 20 years, which means we need to be producing a little over 30 units a year to meet our forecasted need. Now, this doesn't speak to where we're at right now, which is we have a deficiency in housing. So we're not starting at ground zero, we're already in a deficit, but this is the projected need over the next 20 years. So why the housing challenges? For us, it's a number of factors. Land cost and supply. We have very limited supply of developable land, and it's quite expensive. We have severe terrain constraints here on the coast in Newport. There's really no flat ground left to develop, so you're dealing with steep slopes, or you're dealing with wetlands, issues that increase the cost of development. We have limited infrastructure to support new development, and it's not available everywhere within what we call our urban growth boundary, or the area that we can annex into to add additional land. For that matter, we don't have infrastructure in place to serve all of the vacant land that's already in our city limits. Scale and profitability is an issue out here. We're not the valley. The scale of projects are smaller, which makes it a little bit more difficult for developers to meet their profit expectations. The rural location, that increases the cost of everything from materials to labor. A lot of those in the construction industry who are doing projects in Newport are coming in from the valley. We have a very relatively small pool of local construction contractors. So there's always, it doesn't really matter whether or not, it's a particularly busy cycle or a down cycle. There always seems to be a labor shortage when it comes to trained and skilled folks in the construction industry. Seasonal housing is a challenge for us. We have put in place a number of provisions in Newport to deal with that. We do limit the number of vacation rental dwellings in the city with a license cap. We also regulate where they can locate in the city. It's been a challenge for us because we just don't add enough units, and when they get scooped up for seasonal housing such as vacation rental, there's just nothing to backfill those. And a number of those housing units, they're oceanfront units, they're Many of them are high-end units. They wouldn't necessarily be affordable to folks in our community. However, you do have that kind of spillover effect that as those get tied up into vacation rentals, it has that kind of pushes out folks from other areas. A unit that would otherwise have been available for month-to-month purposes, now it's a vacation rental. That person who was there on a month-to-month basis now has to look elsewhere, and it just further tightens and constricts the available rental market. Impact fees and exactions, fees that we charge here at the city certainly influence the overall ability of a developer to pull a project off, and we need to be sensitive to that on our end to ensure that we're not asking so much that they just can't make a go of it in terms of a project. So for the developer, again, land costs, purchase price, closing, recording fees, that's all part of that. Finance charges, title, you guys, loan fees, taxes, interest, all part of that package. And then we get into the permit and impact fees, which would be our building permits, our excise taxes, our system development charges. Those all fit into that category. Then you have your soft costs, your architectural engineering. For us, geotechnical is a pretty big one because of where we're at, the unstable slopes we have out here. Legal, appraisal, environmental surveying, and development fees are all kind of part of that soft cost package. And then you have your hard construction costs, which I've listed here: demolition and abatement, earthwork, on-site utilities, contractor expenses, your building, pavement, landscaping, bonds, off-site work, as part of that too. We here in the city don't influence all of that, and that's the purpose of the slide. What's in red, we do have an influence over. Outside of that, we really don't. So how do we address these challenges? On our end, we've really tried in Newport to really go at it more with funding and incentives, more the carrot than the stick. I don't know that the stick's particularly effective on this front. So we have put in place a package of property tax incentives. We have reduced our system development charges and right-sized them, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. It did create some room for our policymakers to put in place an affordable housing construction excise tax. Those changes to our system development charge methodology and the imposition of the affordable housing construction excise tax went in place, I was in the fall of 2017. So we have now had a few years to see how they're working. We have leveraged our public lands to help get some additional housing out there. We have limited supply of public land that's actually suitable for housing, so that's not a particularly great option for us, but we're trying to leverage every option we can. Down payment assistance for homeownership is something that we've collaborated in with Lincoln County, Lincoln City, and Proud Ground, who's a land trust, pretty prominent land trust up in the Portland metro area, but they also operate in Lincoln County and have a number of properties that they own in Lincoln County in terms of the underlying land lease. The home buyers own the units on the properties. Newport's been fairly aggressive with urban renewal. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we also have funding for rehab and weatherization, which gets at doing what we can to help people stay in homes so we don't lose those homes over time due to just the normal wear you have out here on the coast. So that was quite a bit on this slide. It's the multiple unit property tax exemption. It's one of the tax exemptions we put in place. In this case, we've made it available for that 110 unit affordable housing project that was completed, which I was talking about on a previous slide. So that property tax exemption is a 10-year exemption on the improvements, and they had to provide us with a financial pro forma to show that the project would not otherwise pencil out if not for that property tax exemption. And we have a third party review that and provide their recommendation to our policymakers. At the end of the day, the city council is the one that authorized this. It was to the tune of about $1.6 million over a 10-year period. That very project, this was kind of, it was a $24 million project. You can see their total project cost there in 2019 dollars. And then our portion of that, which is, our permit fees, our soft costs. They did have to do some frontage improvements to a street Northeast 60th. And, they also had costs, and we need to think about too, that are not city costs, but still are public costs, such in this case, it was our local utility district having to upsize equipment. The developer had to pay for that to serve that particular project. We try to see that the total public portion doesn't exceed 5% of the overall project budget. In this case, this particular project, this affordable housing project, was done by a private developer, but it was largely public funds. Most of it came through the Oregon Housing and Community Services through what they call their LIFT program, but they also had low-income housing tax credits from the federal government. So it was about 85%, I want to say, of the funding was public, with the balance being from the developer. And to get these units out there and affordable to households at or below 60% median area income, it took a roughly $190,000 subsidy per unit to make that happen. We also have a nonprofit low-income housing tax exemption. That's one that somebody like Proud Ground takes advantage of for the properties that they control. With respect to system development charges, I'm not sure how many of you in the audience are familiar with what these are, but this is probably the most significant tool we have to pay for infrastructure needed to support growth. And while it in of itself isn't something that typically covers a project in its entirety, it's an important piece of the funding package that we can use to leverage, for example, state and federal funds for water, wastewater, or transportation improvements needed to support new development. Typically, developers in our area have a challenge addressing the infrastructure needs for their development proper, let alone infrastructure needed to get to the property so that it can be developed. Anytime you do system development charges in the state of Oregon, they have to be based on a methodology and a capital improvement plan. You have to consider your growth projections. You identify the projects you expect the need to fund to support that growth. And then use your formulas to figure out how to distill that down to a project by project assessment to collect those dollars. What we ended up doing is we've historically Newport with system development charges, we did a fixture-based approach where it was keyed off of new fixtures in a house or a commercial building. In 2008, we changed over to what is more commonly used, what we call an equivalent dwelling unit assessment. But that is kind of a one-size-fits-all, particularly on the residential side. You could have a 1,200 square foot house or 2,400 square foot house, and your assessment under that methodology would have been the same. One of the changes we made in 2017 was we adjusted that to a square footage assessment, and that's resulted in lower assessments with smaller homes, and it really has made it a little bit more possible to see accessory dwelling units, which we really weren't seeing previously as a housing type. Another thing we did at that time is we reduced the number of capital projects we were collecting for. Really took a hard look at, do we realistically think we're going to need to do this project within, say, the next 20 years? If not, we took it off the list, and that reduced the overall amount of funds we need to collect, and thus the SDC assessments went down. This is an example of what I'm talking about. One thing I hadn't mentioned is we do provide credits for any pre-existing development that was on the property within the last 10 years. If they take it off, they get a dollar for dollar credit. So when you look up here, and you see a credit, in this case, this one here, there was a prior water meter on the property, therefore they ended up getting a credit for that. So what you see here in 2014, that was the old methodology, and that's what the fees would have been under the new methodology that went into effect in 2018. You can see that the balance paid, on these was considerably lower, even though we have excise taxes we're collecting for. Like many jurisdictions, we collect for the school district. So that's a pass through for us, and those are funds they need to be able to improve and expand schools so that they can accommodate growth and additional students. Same principle applies to when you look at commercial development. These are some of the projects we've had in recent years. Last few years, Marine Studies Initiative building was completed down in the Hatfield Marine Science campus down there in South Beach. It was the first new building that Oregon State University had constructed, I believe, since the late 60s in the campus. Pretty impressive buildings. It was designed is designed to withstand the forces of a tsunami nearshore cascading event. It's got vertical evacuation designed into it. This particular photo is when they were building it, but you can see on this photo the ramp that goes up to the top of the building. That's the assembly area up on the top. Lower floor is designed to break away. At least the exterior wall elements are designed to break away so the wave forces can flow through, and this stays on its pile foundations. Very deep, robust pile foundation for this. Pretty expensive project. It was over 60 million for 73,000 and change in terms of its square feet or square footage. But Oregon State University being what it is, this is a model project for their engineering folks to show that you can design this type of facility for vertical evacuation in an area that's subject to tsunamis. Go back to SDCs again. They had some credits, their fees. That was their balance paid. This just kind of shows how that played out in terms of the change in methodology for these various projects. Our affordable housing construction excise tax, it's 1% of the construction value. This was made available by the legislature, I want to say around 2016. We're one of not a large number of jurisdictions that have adopted it. The state law limits how these funds are to be used. So in terms of our collections, half the money has to be used for development incentives for affordable housing, namely buy downs of system development charges or buy downs of building permit fees. We have about 35% of what we collect is what we call is our flexible. It can be used for a variety of different affordable housing programs. And then 15% we have to remit to the state, Oregon Housing Community Services, for down payment assistance programs. And they have agreed to return those back to communities that contribute. And that gets at that partnership we have with Proud Ground. Our construction excise tax applies to both residential and non-residential uses. Although there are a number of projects that are exempt from having to pay that, including public or state projects like the Hatfield Marine Science Center project didn't have to pay that. Hospital district, that kind of thing. We've collected about $500,000 since the project was established in 2017. For home ownership down payment assistance, this is the partnership we've had with Proud Ground. We did the collaboration with Lincoln County, Lincoln City, and Proud Ground, and we're able to pool enough funds to do 8 basically grants to prospective buyers basically what we try to do with this program is kind of bridge that gap between what the price is for the housing unit and what the individual household can afford. So this particular Newport example, with a $240,000 price with $82,000 subsidy, the household could get into that at $158,000 now. As I mentioned, they own the home, and then Proud Ground, as a nonprofit, owns the lot, and then they lease it from Proud Ground under a long-term lease that ensures affordability. That's the purpose of that. This is a project we did with where we leveraged our land and we're able to do a partnership with Habitat for Humanity. It's a duplex. Every unit counts. And we have a deed restriction in place with them to ensure affordability. As I mentioned, we've been pretty aggressive with urban renewal. And so urban renewal is not a new tax. What urban renewal is an agreement essentially amongst the various taxing entities in an area. So your school district, your county, your city, port, community college, hospital district, all of those taxing entities agree to set aside a portion of what they would otherwise collect moving forward for reinvestment in a particular area that we have to, in terms of a legal term, call it blight. But it's an area in the community that's underdeveloped. It lacks adequate infrastructure, for example. And the premise behind urban renewal is that if you make good investments with those dollars to improve your infrastructure, for example, in that area, you're going to attract new investment into that area. And at the end of the day, when you shut that urban renewal district down, the tax base would be more robust than it would otherwise be had you done nothing. And that's what makes it attractive to various taxing entities to say, okay, we can forego a little bit now to get a lot more later. And while I'm talking about that in the context of taxes, that also means improving the overall quality of development and generally the quality of life in the area. It all goes part and parcel with improving the health of the tax base. We have 3 districts. 2 of them are shown on this map. We call the north sides in blue, McLean Point's in the green. And then we have a South Beach district that's closing down to new projects at the end of 2025. Collectively, we have about 50 million in planned infrastructure investments over the next between 15 and 20 years. I talked briefly about the rehab and weatherization program. This is one where we again have partnered with the county and we have leveraged what we call community development block grant funds for housing rehab loans. We have quite a bit of funding available for these. These are targeted to individuals or households who cannot afford a typical housing rehab loan. And so it's a very important tool for those, particularly your older housing stock, where if they don't do that roof repair or they don't replace those windows, that house will eventually fall off of it being a viable housing unit in your community. And so we have a number of loans outstanding here. They're paid off when the home is eventually sold. So we have to continuously reach out and pull in additional community development block grant funds to keep that kind of a program working. Our current partnership is with Dev Northwest out of Corvallis. They're administering that on our behalf, doing the outreach, doing the loans, and ensuring that the work is performed appropriately. So again, I think from my perspective, our incentive-based approaches are probably preferable over regulatory solutions. Lack of affordable housing in our communities is a long-term challenge. We need to be clear about our roles and expectations in our various agreements. As I mentioned, many of these strategies we've been pursuing are partnerships. So we want to really be clear about what we can do relative to what others We need to be looking at this in terms of the long game. Success for us is incremental, and each of these different tools that we try to pursue help to some degree. We also need to recognize limitations of housing related nonprofits. We just don't have a lot of nonprofit capacity here in Newport. I think that's pretty typical of a rural area as opposed to, say, a Portland, or Salem, or Eugene. And then we need to regularly assess our progress and recalibrate. And part of that is a housing study that we're currently doing. And I'll be talking about that here in a little bit. So with respect to the study, we do a fairly detailed housing study. Typically, we try to do those every 8 to 10 years. Now, statutorily, I believe we have to do them every 8 years. If the legislature just tightened all that up. We are able to access some state funds to assist with that. Some of the questions we get at are, how much growth is likely to occur in 20 years? Where is our buildable land? Of that, how much of it's constrained by terrain or wetlands? How much of it's vacant, or what we call partially vacant, where it's underdeveloped, so you can get additional density over time. If we don't have enough buildable residential land, how do we expect to accommodate our growth needs? What kind of policy adjustments do we need to make? What kind of changes to regulations do we need to do to support development of housing? What kind of programs or actions to support development of housing can we take? And we need to think of this in the context of all income levels. So we're not talking about just affordable housing or 60% of median area income. We need to think of workforce, which is typically 80 to 120%, and high-end housing. And we also, with this particular round, are looking at the what can be done to assist those that are without homes at this point. So, there are two pieces to it. We have what we call a housing capacity analysis, which is the technical work, the buildable lands inventory, the demographic analysis, market analysis, land sufficiency. We look at all of that. Then the housing production strategy is where we really look at what measures the city can do to help move the dial in terms of housing production. Development for it to occur, I mean, there are a number of players, and we're just one. So you do have your market feasibility, you have your public policy, land capital. We don't play in all of these arenas. I think that's one of the things I was mentioning earlier. But where we do have influence, we need to think carefully about how to use that influence to promote the construction of additional housing. One piece that we put into this that we haven't done previously with our housing studies is we said, okay, we've identified vacant or partially vacant land within the city or within our urban growth boundary that could be developed for housing, but how much of it really is likely to be developed considering things such as terrain or lack of infrastructure in particular. We're doing this in part too to help inform us as a city. We have limited funds to build additional infrastructure, so we want to think carefully about, okay, strategically, if the city were to invest in, say, extending water mains, sewer mains, streets to this particular area, is it likely to be developed with housing that's affordable within our community or not? And if through this assessment, the property pretty clearly isn't ever going to realize housing on it, then maybe that's an area we don't want to focus on. So we looked at, and we've completed this analysis largely at this point. We looked at 9 different sub areas within our community. For that, some of them are infill sites, some of them are what we call greenfield or vacant sites, and we looked at a range of different housing types. Some types of housing are given the profit margins on it, they can pay more in terms of for the property and pay more in terms of their infrastructure investment, still come out with something that would be marketable. That tends to be your larger single family or medium single family type development. Apartments, the margin's much tighter. So when we looked at that, we looked at a number of different housing types, and we were looking at kind of best case scenario, because and so that's why you look at rental prices, for example, a little bit higher than what they are currently, but what we would expect to see at the top end of our market, say in the next couple of years. The purpose for that is if they, with these rosier projections and development won't pencil out, it's certainly not going to pencil out with rental rates that are even tighter. And so those were the different housing types that we looked at, everything from apartments down to single family detached, slope conditions, townhouses and the like. While I have a lot of slides on this, I didn't share for purposes of not overwhelming you within our limited time. This one I thought was particularly important in that what it shows is that some of these different areas that we looked at, for example, I'll just say this area 1A here is about 35, 37 acres on the north side of town. When we looked at it relative to kind of a high density residential blend, it may pencil out. Certainly with some assistance with infrastructure investments, it's likely to pencil out. Here with multifamily, it wouldn't. Your infrastructure cost per buildable acre are such that the developer's not going to have enough money to buy the property and get a product on there that's going to hit those target rental rates. You see in a number of these areas, that infrastructure cost, we have it way up here. There's probably no closing that gap even with targeted investments from the city. So those areas are areas we probably won't be seeing housing, because they're just, the cost of getting infrastructure to them is such that there's no way to make it really pencil out. Some of these other areas, it's much more workable. You see that, on areas 9, for example, or areas 4, or you see that here in areas 5 and 6, which are in South Beach, we call our Wilder Plan development, and another piece that's next to it. And I think the big factor there, frankly, is that we have the infrastructure in place to support new development down there. One of the most expensive pieces to this equation tends to be water and wastewater lift stations, which we have to put in all over the place, given our terrain. If you're getting into a new wastewater lift station, that's a multi-million-dollar expenditure. That's an awful big chunk of money that you're dedicating to one piece of your overall infrastructure package. It's hard to make a project pencil out. So where we have water and wastewater capacity in place, it's much more likely that you're going to be able to see development happening in those areas. Again, that's the cost higher than residual value. Those are the areas where we're going to have trouble seeing any kind of housing just because of the infrastructure costs. So that housing study, we're wrapping up the capacity analysis, the first piece of it, which we need to go adopt under the state's rules by the end of the year. And then the production strategy, which is the policy changes that we may be implementing to help promote housing. We have a little more time to wrap that up. And so we're looking at the middle of next year on that one. Just a few points on infrastructure financing strategies, in addition to the ones we've already discussed. Fuel taxes, that's really one we can use for transportation improvements. Not a huge source of funding on an annual basis, but enough to do targeted projects here and there in the city. Our utility rates are our principal funding source for water and wastewater. And what we do is we key those such that we leverage those for revenue bonds. And we also are able to tap into some low interest loans from state sponsored programs. to get critical water and wastewater infrastructure in place. Lodging tax can be used in a targeted manner. Part of our lodging tax can be used, goes to our general fund, and so it's pretty flexible. The restricted funds, it would have to be a tourist-oriented project for us to be able to expend it on infrastructure. We do collect franchise fees from utilities that put their infrastructure in our road rights of way. We use those funds for infrastructure work in certain areas. And then a lot of what we do is we take our limited funds, such as many of those we've been talking about, and use those to leverage state or federal dollars. What I'm showing here are a number of different programs so that we can cobble together the funding for a bigger project. Other funding options, we have local improvement districts where neighbors come together. That would be one. Certainly have your straight up general obligation bond you can take out to voters. Food and beverage taxes, we don't have one, but some jurisdictions do that. So in some cases, you can form kind of a special district or to support infrastructure as well. There's been some discussions in our area about doing that potentially for a municipal airport, making it a regional airport, and so that infrastructure cost is shared by a larger population. Lastly, I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the things we're doing in our city center area. If you're familiar with Newport, our downtown is choked with traffic. And given the large volume of traffic on US 101, both north and southbound, the storefronts, which were historically built right to the property lines, they're just not attractive for retail use, and many of them are vacant at this point in time. So we have parallel streets. This is one of them, Southwest 9th, that is also one that is a little bit underdeveloped, especially in terms of the types of development that are adjacent to it. So we completed a transportation system plan update just earlier this year, and it had been probably about 2.5 years in the making. And we've identified two options for kind of reworking our transportation system through our downtown area to help create conditions for reinvestment. One is doing what we call a short couplet, where you take your, in this case, your northbound US 101 traffic and divert it onto 9th Street. And then for that coupleted area, your southbound stays in the traditional 101 alignment. What that allows you to do is you're taking a couple of vehicle lanes off of 101 and redirecting them onto 9th. That gives you room to pull your sidewalks out, put in buffer zones, put in bike lanes, retain some on-street parking, and create conditions that are a little bit more conducive to residential over, say, first floor retail commercial. One of the things we'd really like to do in our city center area is get some additional housing down there, because we have a lot of services in the area. It's convenient. People can walk to them, bike to them. They don't have to take their car. And but to do that, we're going to have to kind of rework our transportation system to make it attractive for walking or cycling, doing something other than driving to get what you need. And the added benefit of this is that then it puts additional vehicle exposure on 9th Street, which is going to make it more attractive for commercial development. We also are looking at maintaining that two-way traffic, because couplets aren't always popular. And so another option we have is just to keep the two-way traffic along 101 and then add bike lanes on 9th Street. It's about placemaking, and we really want to create vibrant places in our city center, so it's an attractive place for investment and for people to go. We have a farmers market that currently is in our city center area. They would have a dedicated space as part of this, so it's just a very important piece for us to keep in mind as we tackle this. And so again, promoting mixed use is something that's big here. Distribute transportation investments to the widest range of opportunities. improve overall mobility, improve walking and biking, introducing streetscape improvements, and improving the overall functionality of the street grid and the urban pattern in the area. So now that we've completed the transportation piece, what we're next going to be starting after the first of the year is what we call the City Center Revitalization Project, where we say, okay, we've got these two options now. We need to pick one. And pair with that changes to how we approach the private side regulation and developing an incentive package for, say, business facade improvements or reinvestment in properties to really try to catalyze new development and redevelopment in that area. And so what we're trying to achieve, you often see in some other areas, couplets are pretty, for example, pretty common in along high volume highways and communities. Ashland's got a good example. I just included that one. I've got gobs of others, but what we're trying to accomplish if we do this kind of investment is to attract something like, as you see here, this is Ashland on, I think, Lithia Way. This is all reasonably, new development, and you see that you get that mixed use residential over retail along that. It's a little bit more density, a little bit more convenience, and frankly, if we're going to see more apartment development in Newport, we got to get it closer to services because it's really hard to get apartment development on the periphery given a train. This is the other leg of Lithia. Where you, if you're familiar with Ashland, you see quite a bit of that storefront on the first floor with offices or residential above it. So that's what we're really looking to do. So we'll be starting that city center revitalization work again the first of the year. It's probably going to take us about, I would say, 12 to 18 months to complete that. We'll be doing. We will be bringing in consultants to assist us with that work. We tapped into what we call Transportation Growth Management Program. It's a joint program by the Oregon Department of Transportation and the State Department of Land Conservation Development, where they provide funding for this type of work. And so we'll be probably doing some in-person small group design shreds, things of that nature. So really looking forward to that effort, kind of seeing what comes of it. So that's about what I had at this point. Happy, I think I reserved a few minutes here for questions if anybody has them.
Derek, thank you so much for that great report and for your rich material. We really appreciate it. In the ever-changing world of city development, it's nice to know what's going on in Newport. So we appreciate your time this morning and your expertise and everything. And we do have one question. Do you know if the one-way couplet in Philomath, am I pronouncing that correctly? Philomath has helped the business or the businesses there?
You are seeing reinvestment in Philomath in the vicinity of where they have that kind of couplet. And they're actually in the process of further improving that. I would say, though, that Philomath is a little different than our city center area. We're probably a little bit closer to an Ashland or an Astoria or a Springfield or a North Bend than we are Philomath. Philomath, much of what's been coupleted, it's a longer couplet, is a less dense development pattern. So where you have a situation where your development was already set back from property line, say upwards of 20 feet or more. And so when you have that couplet in that, it's more of a highway oriented couplet. You don't have those storefronts close to the edge of the right of way. They're much further out. So it's a little bit more dispersed development pattern. It's a little bit more, I think I would say less attractive for walking, for example. Now there are parts of that Philomath couplet, however, that do have kind of that more traditional build to your property line downtown. And you've seen quite a bit of retail reinvestment in those areas over the last few years with the brewery in there. You've got a bakery, restaurants, retail shops. So you're starting to see more reinvestment, particularly in the portion of Philomath's couplet that has that kind of more traditional downtown style development pattern.
Well, that's the only question we have. If folks have additional questions, Derek, do you mind if they reach out to you? I see your contact information here on the screen.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share. Well, it looks like you have this in YouTube, but I can send you a PowerPoint. I'm happy to share those slides with anybody.
That would be tremendous. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. As a reminder, your certificates will come by email, so look for those. You should have those in a few short days, as well as yes, we'll have this up on our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining. On behalf of Western Title Central Oregon, we thank you for your business, and we look forward to our next transaction with you. Derek, thanks again so much for today. We really appreciate your time and bringing us the update for Newport. Excellent material. So we want to say thank you, and everyone enjoy the rest of your week. Appreciate it so much. Okay, have a great day.